Do we hear the read for it?
Recording.
Hello, and welcome to Write Volumes One Question. This is where we ask our writers one question, they then hear their thoughts on the subject and how it affects them and their writing. My name is Janaea. I'm one of the editors and founders of Write Volumes. Our goal is to give diverse voices an outlet for expression and to bring attention to diverse writers and our thoughts. In this one question series, we may not discover the right answers. There may not be right answers, but there are right discussions. The goal is to stimulate conversations, voice potentially alternative perspectives, provide a glimpse on how others view the world, and to expand ideas. Please remember, while we are a range of people on this panel, we are individuals and not a spokesperson for race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, or anything. We speak for ourselves, not on behalf of everyone in our tribes or community. People are not stereotypes. We have a voice and we have our own voice. It seems like society's current process is very adversarial. Us against them, right versus wrong, good versus evil. It's a coin approach, one side versus the other. I view people in the world as in constant motion. I'm capable of having more than one side, more than one emotion at a time. I can embody contradictions. The world is large enough to contain multitudes. We all exist. The world is not static, even with its cyclical nature of day, night, seasons, there are still variations. So why should we as people be static? Why should we be limited? People are rarely one thing too. As the world evolves, so can the mind and so can the heart. Thinking and feeling can be a muscle. If we don't exercise them, it won't grow. This series is to help color the world beyond black and white, beyond the coin approach. This is to allow for shades of people. Some of the questions in the series stem from the biases I discovered in my writing and reading habits, and thought it would be interesting to discuss with fellow writers to learn more about writing, storytelling, other people, about everything really. Let's listen, let's think, let's feel, let's ask, let's share, let's talk. Here's one question for today. How do you decide the gender of your characters? So we have a panel of writers. What we'll do is have each of the panelists state their thoughts in 2 to 3 minutes max. Then we will discuss it as a group, ask each other questions or make comments. Let me introduce the panel for today's question. Michael Dunbar is an aspiring writer from Florida. When he is not documenting his tales of not being your average Florida man, he enjoys traveling the world, dancing, and enjoying local cuisine. Author of To Kill for Love and Shades of Horror and Strangeness, Adventure to Rio and Shades of Transition and Transformation. Matthew Vargo lives and writes in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He is pursuing a creative writing MFA at Chatham University and has previously been published in the National Gay and Lesbian Review. Author of 2 Hallucinations, 1 Monster, in Shades of Horror and Strangeness. Voice My Jinn and I, and Dark Apricot Sky Turning Plum in Shades of Transitions and Transformation. Fanny Price resides in the Chicagoland area and enjoys creating stories that bring her hometown and other cities to life. Siren in Shades of Horror and Strangeness introduces readers to Veronica Sykes prior to the challenges she confronts in After the Flesh, the debut novel of Fanny's Dragon Riders series. Visit fannypricenovels.net for updates on her book releases, excerpts, free reads, and more. Okay, so let's begin with Michael. What do you think? How do you decide the gender of your characters?
Well, for me, I'm still early in my writing career, so for me, when I write, a lot of my stories are based on my own experiences. So a lot of the main characters are, well, except for the horror story, I still digest from that. But for most part, a lot of the stories I write is from my own personal experiences. So it's more of a male person that I see in that role. And it's more of like how I view the story could be manipulated whether to fit the environment or the universe I'm trying to create. So that I am trying to do a better job of trying to incorporate different genders into the stories. I think that's just a part of growing and developing as a writer, is figuring out how you can put your head into another gender, even if you aren't that gender. I think that's difficult right now, but I am trying to figure out better ways to do it. So.
I'll go. So yeah, similar to you, Michael, a lot of the stories that I write are from male perspectives. And part of that is because I'm a man, right? So it makes sense, and sort of how I experience the world just like translates naturally to the page that way. So to some of these panel questions, I think that my answers they fall in similar swim lanes. So I think gender is always present in our stories because it's present in our society. We cannot get away from gender, right? And so because of that, like your readers are going to bring their own notions of gender to the story that you're writing. And it becomes a choice that the author is making when they choose to gender their characters, the ways that they're gendered, the descriptions, the way that the character goes through the story. And those are all decisions that you make that then have consequences within the story. I personally think that non-gendered or stories that push against like revealing gender are interesting and have a lot of they just poke a hole in what we expect from stories, and they like when that happens. But I think like the main things that, at least with decisions around gender, are like what do you feel comfortable writing in, but then also how is the gender of the characters playing out to serve the story.
So you guys both bring up really good points about the perspective, because even though 9 out of 10 times when I'm writing my female characters, my protagonist or my main character is going to be female, going to be a Black woman, because I don't think there's ever too many stories that are told from a Black woman's perspective. But I have written in a male voice because I switch perspectives in some of my stories to a male voice. And I do, I have to sit back and struggle with that and say, okay, is this how a man thinks? Because, we do, I think one of the great things about us all is that we all think differently. Black people think differently than Chinese people, than white people, than everybody. And men and women think differently. And just, transgender thinks, everyone thinks differently. So I have to kind of step back and say, is this how a man would approach a problem? But as far as choosing gender, I really base it on, how is that character going to impact my protagonist? So I first built that protagonist up, and then how are they going to interact with that person? If it's a friend or a lover, is my protagonist straight? Or does she have boundaries? Is she homosexual? Is she bisexual? Am I looking, if she may be straight, but I'm looking to explore those boundaries, and that kind of determines how that next character is going to, if they're going to be a man or a woman. I also kind of look at how does it affect the story? If I have a character, if my protagonist is a heterosexual female, and that character is going to be her love interest, that means it's a man. But if it's going to be her bestie, can that now be a female? And does it have to be? Can it still be a male? And how will other characters in the story react to them having this friendship, this close bond, with being completely platonic? How does that play? Does that become a subplot of the story, or does it start detracting away from the story? So I think some of it for me is, how is that gender going to best serve the story and make it more interesting, and not call attention to it?
really interesting because, okay, so while I would love to say that I analyze the conflict and choose the best gender to push forward that conflict in my stories, I don't always know if that's the case. Because a lot of times I'll start off the story with an idea. And the idea doesn't have a gender. It's like, oh, I want to tell the tale of, like, let's just say, for example, Ethiopian New Year's happens to be on September 11th. So I want to tell the struggle of being Ethiopian and dealing with September 11th. And then I try to go through and figure out, like, what do I want the conflict to be? And, you know, I go through. And then, like for that story, I had the lead character be a man. But now that I go back and I think about it, why couldn't the lead character be a female?
Yeah.
And I don't know why. Could be, and you know, like, but in the story, I did it all from a male perspective. Okay, maybe some guys might not agree, but like, I thought I was thinking like a man, and like had him go through and react as how I envisioned a man would react. But I don't know why I made that initial choice in the beginning. And so I don't know if, like, again, there's some inherent biases I have, like maybe people won't take it more serious, like we'll take it more seriously if the lead is a man, or if they think the woman is just being emotional, you know what I mean? So like I try to think I leave that all out when I choose a character, but I don't really think I do. And a lot of my short stories that I write below 5,000 words, I think it's pretty 50-50 whether it's a male or a female. But the longer pieces, it leans toward being a guy. And I don't know why, so.
Well, I like that you're kind of like self-analyzing, you know, are you choosing to make it a guy because you want it to be taken more seriously? You know, I think that's, as a writer, that's some of the things that we have to do. Why are we making the choices that we do, that we're making? And is it something that's stemming from some subconscious drive, you know? Is it that you're truly making it a man because you want it to be, you know, subconsciously you're thinking they'll take it seriously if it's a guy, and if it's a woman, they'll just say, oh, she's just, you know, emotional, or she's just going through something, or broke up with her boyfriend or something? Or is there another reason that you're making it, you know, a guy? Can you analyze that and say, no, I really want to tell this from a male perspective because it's going to be different in a more interesting way, maybe, especially depending on what you have him go through and experience, and what happens to him and how that shapes him. But I think it's awesome that you're doing that retrospective of why is this a guy? And, you know, maybe if it's a short story, it might be worth a while to write it from a perspective of a female and see how it's different.
Yes.
Yes.
I was trying to
rewrite. It solves all.
Yeah, right?
It sounds so easy.
But if you look at a lot of stories today, okay, maybe not, but when I look at them, I don't know why the author chooses for it to be a man or a female when they do. Do you know what I mean? Because I was like, well, I could see that character being a male, or I can see that character being a female. Like, it's very rare for me that the story, unless it's about like giving birth or something like that, it has to be limited to one gender, you know? Like, I almost want all books to have like multiple versions when lead character are like different genders, you know? I don't know. Maybe I'm just weird like that, but
I agree. I think one of the things is that, and that's part of one of the cool things about being a writer is you can create, let's say if you're like Fanny, where you've created novels, and you can create a whole series of novels, and you can create it where, let's say if you're creating like detective series, because I know growing up, one of my favorite books were the detective series of children's books, and it's usually you're the Sherlock Holmes or like some kid detective that went on a case of something, and it's like 3 or 4 books in a series. Well, that can be a guy, that can also be a girl. It doesn't. And one of the cool things is you can have one series that was on the male perspective, then you can have one that's from the female perspective, and you can then either create the same story but just change the protagonist, or you can create it in a way where it's different challenges from that perspective too. And that's something where I'm actually just sitting here listening. I'm like, oh, that's actually cool.
That's a cool idea.
Maybe I could do that. But that's something where, like where you're talking about, Fanny, is like even thinking of the male voice in a situation, I would have to think a female's voice in that scenario, like the thoughts and the perspectives, the fears, and really put myself in those shoes before I actually write it.
Yeah, it's having done it, it's difficult because I did it for Lachlan. So it's written After the Flesh is written in first person, but it's from both point of views. It alters chapters, and it's very easy to slip into Veronica's head because, you know, it's like, okay, as a woman, I know kind of how she would approach this. But as a man, especially when there's that interior voice where they're thinking things through, and it's like the thought process is so different. So I have to have, you know, guys read it and be like, does this make sense? Is this something that a man would say? Or is this just like what women think that men think or would say, or is it genuine? So, you know, it's challenging, but at the same time, it's fun when it's rewarding when you have, you know, a man read it and go like, oh, that's really good. That's a good male perspective. And like, yes, I can be a man.
That's awesome.
It's interesting that you bring that up though, because I think I feel the exact same way. Like if I'm writing female characters, I'm like, oh, I need someone to read this because, and this is really personal to me, right? But it's like, I'm just not confident to say that I do know that deep interior voice or can speak from that. And I don't want to just assume that I can do anything and play God convincingly.
That's kind of what
Again, why we write sci-fi,
Right?
or fantasy that solves our problems. And we're just dealing with aliens, like, or creatures. So much simpler.
It really does stretches the writer's empathy to try to write from a different gender perspective, because then I do find myself if I'm having arguments with other people going, oh, they're seeing it from that perspective. And can I use this in my story? And then they're like, are you even listening to me?
You're like, wait a minute, hang on.
Hold on. Yeah.
Yeah. I still...
There's the whole different scenario where they're doing stories from like animal perspectives, which I'm like, how do you even do that? It's just like, I know it's just us projecting our thoughts onto animals, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, I could see how a dog would think that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
I think one thing that I find fascinating, I think one thing I hope to eventually do as I continue to grow in writing is like not only just gender, but also historical perspectives. Like when you actually put yourself in a historical setting, years in the past or years in the future, and you're really developing not only scene like the gender and how they interact, but also historically, like trying to do an accurate historical representation of the era. That's like, dang. I now think about it, I'm like, dang, that's hard. That's a lot of research.
It's a lot of research, and it's also hard to look at it through that lens.
Yeah.
Because so many times, you know, people say, oh, you know, if I was a slave back then, you know, I would have done this, that, and the third. And it's like, well, yes, if you take your 21st century, you know, how you've been brought up and your values and your knowledge and everything. Yeah. But if you were back then, it's completely different.
Right.
So it's kind of, you've got to take that out of it and say, okay, if you're in, you know, this Victorian time period or whatever, how do people react to things? It's not going to be the same. They don't even talk the same as we do now. So they definitely didn't think the same as we do now. But that's an interesting challenge, Mike. I look forward to reading that.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see. I am all, like, horror definitely, like I said, was way outside my comfort zone, and it definitely turned into a thrilling story. I definitely went into a thought process. I was like, dang, that was really deep. Don't know if I want to go back there, but but going through that, I was like, wow, that was cool to really challenge and really expand what you are capable of writing. And Fanny, I would love to do that. I would love to see, like, trying to do that same approach and going deep into a historical setting and seeing how I could really develop a scene and hopefully develop a scenario where people can take away from it as if they were there.
Yeah.
So your next story is a historical one from the female perspective.
Really just complicating it. Yeah.
Well, we didn't say it had to be horror too.
Can it also be an animal? Like a female animal?
All right, we can do like a little platypus from like a million years ago, like how it navigated through everything.
Okay, so gender, it's complicated.
Yeah.
Check that box.
It's something that's very complicated.
Yeah, I don't know. It's still, again, one of those things I'm just going to keep playing around with. And I think I might do the multiple stories from the same story from multiple perspectives. And I think that might actually, maybe that could be an anthology. Everybody writes a story with the main character's gender.
Oh, of the
like
opposite gender?
I
So
like
we
that.
do a story that's of the opposite gender. So if
No, two stories.
No,
One of the main character is female.
so there has to be a male platypus and a female platypus. Well,
Yep.
but are they, or is that one where it's asexual? I mean,
There are males and females.
okay.
Or we can research and find out.
The males.
that's part of our research. We gotta make sure
Right.
it's accurately portrayed in our stories.
The males stab each other with paralyzing agent when it's time to breed, and then the ones that don't get paralyzed can breed. Platypuses are weird creatures. I'm so
That got
sorry.
dark, Matt.
Yeah, okay. We're definitely off topic.
For the horror anthology. That's
You're
horror.
welcome, Internet. We got you.
Interesting to know, though.
Yeah.
Okay,
Oh,
I've learned something new for today.
But transitioning back onto the topic of gender. I don't know. Like I think it is complicated, and with the society it's a little more complicated, and I agree with Fanny, there should be more African American female leads in stories. But yeah, it'll be really interesting to see if there is a bias in publishing. Well, not interesting to see, but like hopefully we can break it so that there are no more biases. And like it shouldn't matter what gender your main character is to be a good story.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. An exciting future is one that has like more rich culture and stories than ones that are maybe like prepackaged to be, sellable, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes it feels like it's just lazy writing. They're like, oh, they think this will sell. And so like they just keep playing like the gender stereotypes or something like that. And we want characters to be rich and complex, just like
just like we are.
Yeah.
Well, not the rich part, but the complex part.
We're rich in personality.
Yeah.
We're rich in so many different ways.
Well, that is all the time we have for today. I'm glad we solved the world's problems.
Yeah.
Tune in for the next One Question series video as we continue to explore ideas that may not be as simple as they appear on the surface, and as we help writers and readers make conscious choices. Panelists, thank you so much for your time, sharing your thoughts, and for your writing. We also want to thank everybody for listening. This is Behind the Volume, a look at Write Volumes in the Making, One Question. Please check out writevolumes.com for our latest info. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you have any questions that you're curious about and think could be good for our One Question series, please message me at Write Volumes on Twitter or Facebook, or email us at writevolumes@gmail.com. And perhaps your question will be chosen for a video topic. Thanks, everyone. And remember, together we can write volumes. And... Thank you.